In episodes 5 and 6 of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, we get 4 different versions of Midge. We get Midge the comic, Midge the worker, Midge the daughter, and Midge the entertainer. We've got all that and more, so stay tuned.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
That's right, folks. This is the after show. Okay, cool. We're about to cover episodes 5 and 6 of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, where we get 4 different versions of the title character. We get Midge the comic, Midge the worker, Midge the daughter, and Midge the entertainer. We've got all that and more, so stay tuned.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
More wonderful music.
This was actually an audition song that I used to have when I did musical theater.
Did you?
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's one of those songs that almost could seem sexist, but it's just so charming that you can't help but love it, I feel.
I love it.
I hope I'm not like mansplaining that.
No,
It is from Flower Drum Song, so it's a little...
Problem, it hasn't aged as well as some other musicals, maybe. Well, one thing that has aged well is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which we're covering today here on AfterBuzz TV. As I mentioned at the top, we're covering episodes 5 and 6 because we're covering 2 episodes per after show. My name's Jeff, guys, and I'm surrounded by a group of brilliant co-panelists, including our very own Jewish comedian herself, Sam Davidson.
Hello, Sam Davidson. Super excited to be back talking about one of my favorite shows.
Yes, and Briana Phipps.
Hey guys, Briana Phipps here. You guys decided to talk today about all that happened in these 2 episodes.
Yes,
Me
you're a
too.
musical theater nerd.
Yes,
so
Yeah,
I
I'm a
know.
musical theater nerd.
I always forget that she sings everywhere and it's awesome. I'm Steph Sabraw. I'm really excited about these 2 episodes.
Me too. And with that, I say we get right into it, guys. The first episode we'll be talking about today is Doink, directed by Amy Sherman-Palladino and directed by her husband Dan. It's amazing
I
whenever
just love that that's the title.
it's called Doink.
Doink.
We'll talk about all the ways that you're supposed to say Doink if you're doing stand-up. I am always so impressed when you look at the like creative credits for the show. It's like Amy, Dan, Amy, Dan. Like it's so insane that these 2 handle their shows the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain things, you know how you want something to be done, and you just kind of got to do it yourself.
Yep.
Plus, when you have a writing partner, it's not that uncommon when it's not a couple to have a writing partner that you kind of stick with, or even actors and directors. If you look at Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio, Johnny Depp, and Tim Burton, like
Right.
people tend to stay together a lot because they know what the other one's going to bring.
That's a
Yeah.
great way to put it. Well, they teamed up on this episode, which is episode 5, called Doink. What were everyone's overall thoughts about this episode?
I liked it a lot. I thought that, again, we got to see some new characters, some new dynamics, and I loved seeing this new side of Midge.
I'm very frustrated with Midge in this episode just because of choices she decided to make and not being confident in herself. But I also liked the dynamic we got with Joel's parents and Penny.
True.
Yeah, I love that because Susie's been there for Midge every step of the way. So it's good that we have Midge making decisions on her own, even if they're wrong, because that just makes sense. I mean, she's a grown woman, so
It's a good point, though, because the decisions she makes that we'll get more specific about, but show that she might need Susie more than she thinks she needs Susie.
Oh yeah, of course. She still needs her. I'm just saying she can't always.
She has to fall before she can walk.
Absolutely. It's a really good point, Steph. Well, let's go ahead and talk specifically. As I mentioned at the top, I feel like the way I want to break down our coverage today is with sort of the 4 different versions of Midge that we see. We see her get her first job, so I'm calling that Midge the employee. We see Midge kind of flounder as a comic in a formal setting, but we see her start to thrive in a more casual setting, which we'll talk about. It's a really interesting dynamic. And finally, more family drama, more Joel drama. As always, we'll get into it. And also, guys, we will be covering a lot of this show, so not just those topics, but we also have our stand-up spotlights where we talk about some of the important stand-up comics of the time. Let's start by talking about Midge and her new job. We find out at the very end of the last episode that Midge wants to get a new job, and she seeks employment as an elevator operator. How did you guys feel about this?
I think it's one of those things when you're a little kid and you go, oh, wow, that's a cool job. A cab driver, you know, that seems fun. And it's just so random, but I could see someone very sheltered finding that kind of job fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I just love that elevator scene where she's kind of interviewing the elevator operator, taking her up to her job interview. And just, so you seem to enjoy your job. You seem like you have like it down and everything. I don't know, like, who interviews the elevator?
Midge.
She's so earnest about it. She's
Yes.
like, it's like she was talking to a professor the way. And you've been doing this for 16 years. What do you think? Like, she's just such an optimistic, earnest person.
Yeah, and I mean, in a way, he could have thought she was mocking him,
Right.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Something that I find the most interesting, one of the most interesting things is the dynamic of how her parents raised her. Even though she's still really, really boxed in just because of how society is, something about, I feel like, just how smart her father is does give her this more, she doesn't realize that she's such a type A woman in society to other people. She really thinks that there's other possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a fun start. And of course, during her interview for this elevator operator position, the interviewers are very confused. So she ends up kind of accidentally finding that she would maybe make a much better makeup counter girl. I love the way...
Maybe?
Yeah, exactly. Lady, yeah, that's better. Or is it? I don't know.
No, I said maybe because you were like, maybe would make a better one.
Oh, would definitely. But I feel like the show handles this in such a smart way because, again, it's her charisma and her ability to perform is the thing that gets her this job.
Well, she's a very people person.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, even in theater, they say, theater school, when I went there, you don't necessarily need to be an actor. Like, this can be applied to all different aspects of life, talking to people, getting up in front of people, and this is just...
Being nice to people when you don't want to be nice.
Yeah, and it's a great way to show that because this is kind of the perfect job for her.
I like the other women that we meet in the
Yes.
department store, too.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about, I read it online as Practical Mary, Boy Crazy Vivian, and Glamorous Model Harriet.
I love her dynamic with these people because everyone that we've met so far besides Susie in her life knows her.
Yeah.
And she's starting afresh, she's starting new, especially even more than Susie because none of these people know about her past, know about her and Joel together. She has to kind of give that information up. But these are more her kind of people in certain senses. You know, Susie's her kind of person in a very different sense than these people are.
Right. I thought this was one of the most important but small parts of the season because we're used to kind of people not being that nice to Midge. And it's really easy to have had her work there and have all of these nasty women, you know, oh, you're taking my commission, kind of see her as a threat. But instead, they open her with, you know, they welcome her with open arms and they really do all get along. I was very nervous at first that this was going to be a really catty environment for her. But I love that it wasn't and that these women really care for each other.
Yeah, I was saying before, it gave me kind of Good Girls Revolt type connection between them, and I don't know how much we'll get to see it later in these seasons coming forward, but the workplace scenario for women in this time is just so interesting to me, and the camaraderie that they have and kind of what they talk about.
Yeah. Amy Sherman-Palladino does do a great job of presenting women as friends.
Yeah.
You know, I think so quickly in TV, writers don't believe that like women can have sincere, authentic relationships. Like they have to fight or be catty. But if you look at Gilmore Girls as the ultimate example, Rory and Lorelai are just like the ultimate, most beautiful relationship. And we see a little bit of that here as women who love each other and have each other's backs. And
I love that you brought that up because that's such a misconcept for women because just as men sometimes don't get along and sometimes do, same with women.
yeah, absolutely. I think it was fun to watch Midge have a job for the first time. Watching her love the punch card machine was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I also love she can never turn the stand-up off, so every time the manager walks in and says, "The doors are opening," Mitch says, "You think she says it every time she has sex?" Pretty funny. Yeah, I'm into this stuff. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that for as much as this show has gotten minor criticisms about the way it represents non-white women, Harriet is pretty cool. I like that they have this beautiful black woman who's trying to find her way as a model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, the conversations, I know we'll get into her on stage and everything, but the way black women were perceived, it is still a little bit problematic. And when Midge started talking about her, she didn't realize it, but it also was a little problematic the way she explained it. But Midge doesn't really know any better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's those kind of microaggressions that even in 2018 people are still learning. And also that I do give credit to the addition of Harriet because she is really cool out of that group. But you do have to be realistic that black women weren't getting any opportunities. So to not see them in a workplace isn't because of them, it's because of society.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was nice. I think, the expectation would have been that if we see a black female character in this show, the writers ascribe her as someone who's oppressed and potentially looked down upon for specific reasons. And she has that, right? She's trying to claw her way through the modeling industry. But we also see this very kind of put together, very glamorous woman, which might not have been the take that a lot of other writers would have gone with in this time period. So I thought that was a cool choice.
Yeah. I would have liked to have seen more from her character because it seems as though she has, everyone knows she has to put in more effort. She has to put in more work because of the color of her skin. And she's kind of soaring above everybody. Wow, look at her. She's such a go-getter. She's so beautiful. She's so talented. And I mean, it really kind of shows the work ethic of that kind of woman because you do have to work 10 million times harder.
I was nervous at first because the very first woman of color we got in this show was the Spokane bit in the first episode, which even though I thought it was kind of funny, it was also kind of like, if that's going to be your only character of color, maybe don't use that joke. But the fact that we've broadened it with Harriet, I think, is important and cool stuff. So I think this is sort of a good example of just world building, seeing more of Midge, seeing more of her world. And of course, the reason these seeds are planted is because they later get invited to a party, which I want to save, but we'll get into some of the party stuff later, which is some of my favorite stuff we see in the show.
I also love her parents' dynamic with her getting a job.
Yes, please, yeah.
Well, they're just so different. Abe is so, when he goes back to check on her, you have to do this. You also need a bank account. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And then her mom just being so cold to her for this. How dare you go get a job? You're supposed to be working on getting your husband back.
We've talked about a little bit Abe's 20% proud of Midge, 80% worried about Midge. And I feel like his keeping returning was the perfect example of how Abe feels about all of this. He's confused because he's probably deep down kind of a feminist because he's a smart guy.
Oh, yeah.
But he's sort of afraid to be.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think the difference between Joel's father and him is a lot in their profession, just he's a logical science math person. So, I mean, if any logical thinking person would realize something's kind of off with how we treat women.
Yeah.
Well, Abe values his intelligence and has already established that he is that person, whereas Kevin Pollock's character wants status.
Yeah.
He wants to be revered as this kind of person who he's not yet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And his open mind, Abe's open mind, it's just he sees himself in his daughter a little bit, and it's confusing for him, and he's thinking logically, but he loves it deep down, and he loves her, and I think he's very, very fascinated with his own daughter, which is fun to watch.
Definitely. Speaking of very intelligent women, I would love for you to tell us a bit about Maria Menounos and her podcast.
Yes. Do you guys want to have fun, learn, and grow in all aspects of your life? For those who do, have we got the podcast for you. Conversations with Maria Menounos Podcast Edition is hosted by our AfterBuzz TV founder and drops every Friday on iTunes. Conversations with Maria Menounos features celebrity and influencer interviews, along with secrets and tips on how to be better in all aspects of life, from health and wellness to career, relationships, finances, and more. Let our Maria be the big sister that you've always wanted. Just go to iTunes and subscribe to Conversations with Maria Menounos for free. Be sure to rate rate and comment, and when you do, let Maria know it was us, the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel after show, that got you there. Conversations with Maria Menounos podcast edition. Check it out. It's a great show, guys. I think you'll all really enjoy it.
You will. If we're talking about balancing work, relationships, and passions, like just as Midge has to do, this podcast definitely talks about it. So
Yeah, I think Midge would definitely enjoy it.
she would, for sure. She'd make an amazing guest. I would love
Oh my God,
to hear
yes.
Midge. Yeah. If we ever get Rachel Brosnahan on the show, we'll have to ask her to do it in character.
Oh my goodness.
Well, of course, this show is not only about an employed Midge, but a stand-up comic Midge. So
I want to be employed.
I want to be employed as stand-up. That's a good point. This episode gets on a very important part of stand-up, which I want you to speak to. This is the importance of bombing.
Bombing, yeah, it hurts, guys. It does not feel good, but every big stand-up comedian, the biggest you could possibly think of, they will say themselves they have bombed. It's an extremely important part of being a stand-up, of doing stand-up. But there is that feeling you'll do the exact same set that you did 2 nights before that totally killed, and then you get crickets. And it's very interesting because when you're a comic, you have to realize who your audience is. And sometimes the personal stories don't really get you there. And she, like I said, it was hard. It's hard to watch sometimes. It's hard to bomb. It's hard to watch people bomb. But again, it's a very important part of a comic's journey. And if you can do that, if you can get through that embarrassment, awkwardness, and pain, then you really can do anything. And that's part of the reason why it's so important.
Have you ever had to deal with a heckler like she did?
Yeah, I've dealt with some, and when I first started, I kind of just ignored them. But then then when you engage them, they get afraid. Kind of, they're not used to you shooting back at them. So it's hard though, especially as a woman because it's a lot of times it's men that are the ones, you're not funny, or we don't care, that kind of thing. And it's extremely frustrating. And I'm shocked that Midge doesn't get more of that, in all honesty, being
I think
a woman.
she's just so funny usually that no one can say anything. Like, what are you going to say?
Right.
Oh, there's a room full of people laughing, but you're not funny.
Yeah.
Especially the versions of Midge that we've seen on stage. This is her first time doing stand-up sober, which I think is an important thing to touch on as well. So I think up until now, people have just been so slack-jawed at this crazy drunk lady on stage who's so talented that there hasn't even been room to heckle. It's like, how can you heckle when you're just purely in shock?
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like, and this is another interesting thing I'd love for you to kind of speak to, Sam, is like the whole alcohol and comedy thing is kind of complicated, right?
It is. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Most sets I do, I usually have like a beer or two before I go up there. And sometimes, bringing it with you, which a lot of comics do, it kind of makes this relaxed vibe when people, bring a beer up on stage. But it's a crutch sometimes. Most of the time if I bring it up, I don't even drink it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I know a lot of people that they do this thing where they do stand-up completely sober, and then everyone gets really drunk, and then they do the same set again to see how it differs. And I mean, you're looser when you drink, and that's the truth. And you don't censor yourself as much, which is why a lot of times people are funny, because they don't censor themselves.
Theater actors do the same thing, maybe not to the extent, but they'll take like a shot before going on
Yeah.
to loosen themselves up so they get rid of those little stage fright jitters.
Yeah, it's definitely important for comics to do it sober so they know that they can.
Yeah, I used to perform as well. I was a cruise ship vocalist, and I always felt like one drink was like the best version of myself as a performer.
Yeah.
So I get this, and this is really the first time we've seen Midge do stand-up sober, and she kind of bombs. And Susie has a really important heart-to-heart. A lot of what you were saying of this is an essential part of a stand-up's journey, and like, if you really want this, you need to embrace this. But Midge refuses that advice, and she hires a ghostwriter.
Well, I just want to touch on that a little bit, that she's blaming her audience for why she bombed instead of herself,
Yeah.
and not being able to see that, sometimes you have to readjust your jokes. Sometimes you're just not always going to be funny, and some things won't land and some things won't work.
Right.
Instead of accepting that, she's like, no, it was the audience. They're the reason I bombed.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see a vulnerable Midge. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't really seen her like fail, quote unquote, except for when Joel left. But even that wasn't her own doing. So this was interesting, and obviously provoked some insecurity in her because she hires a ghostwriter played by Wallace Sean. This was a fun scene. I always like Wallace Shawn.
Yes.
How did you guys feel about their interaction at the diner?
I loved it, but I kind of knew it didn't seem like there was schmoozing going on, and I just don't think that she needed a ghostwriter. She just needed to sit down and realize that there's discipline behind comedy, and I think that's really hard for people to realize that it is so manipulated a lot of the times, which isn't to say that's bad. It's a work of art.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love him in everything. Going back to, I think the first time I saw him was Princess Bride. So every time I see him, I just have this inconceivable in my head.
Yes.
But he's such a great actor, and he plays this so flawlessly. This kind of losery guy that sits in this deli all day long, will work for pastrami.
Adorably pathetic.
Yes. Yeah, that's perfect. And like, she needs to find him by the red rose in his lapel. Like, I don't know. There's something really sweet and endearing about him. Like, he just can't get there.
Yeah.
And so her having him write her jokes, I was like, oh, this is gonna end poorly, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, back to what you said about discipline and comedy and writing jokes, because a lot of Midge's way of being on stage and telling jokes is just telling a story. The thing is that you need to find the joke within the story and add that, and sometimes that's the hardest part. And I get her desire to want someone to just kind of add that little punch at the end.
Find out why this is funny.
Yeah, but you gotta kind of do it on your own, and it's a very difficult thing to do, actually.
Well, clearly, because she gets on stage with cards and she bombs.
He told her to go on stage with cards.
Which, by the way, I just want to touch on it. We don't have to talk about it just because I love pickles. He sends her the cards with the pickle, and I was like, I want people to send me cards.
I work with Bree, so I'll make sure I remember that. This was tough to watch, though, and it's another really interesting moment where the kind of comedy she was trying to do wasn't really relevant anymore. Like, I think the show, it wasn't just this kind of hit you over the head with Midge is bad. I felt like it was a more subtle, kind of complicated look at the comedy of the time of, like, maybe 15 years ago, this sort of Bob Hope style of joke here, joke there might have played, but people were over this. In the late 50s, they wanted to see Midge. They didn't want to see a joke machine.
Well, what worked for her was the passion. When she had a passion for a story she was telling, when it got to her emotionally, it was a good story and it hit well and she was funny. But when she was just trying to make things in her life into these stories, it didn't work. And so to have someone also come in and take stories that you've kind of written down but also doesn't know your life and create stories for you was never going to work for her.
Yeah, how cool that the engine of the show becomes that character study of, like, the actual character engine behind Midge. If she has to figure out who she is, plays directly into the plot of she won't be a good comic unless she figures out who she is. So the fact that she's refusing to tell her own stuff not only prevents her from succeeding as a comic, but also succeeding as a woman who's trying to figure out who she is. So there's really, I think, powerful kind of narrative engine and character work that's being done while also being funny. Susie was not happy that Midge made this choice, and it leads to a pretty painful scene between
Not
the
just
two
that
of
she
them.
made the choice, but that she made the choice without consulting her in any kind of way.
Good point. Yeah. How did you guys feel about this conversation between the two of them?
When she just lets her have it, kind of.
Yep.
I thought it was important for both of them. I thought it was important for Susie to have her say in what was happening because she is her manager and she also wants to be taken seriously because she's also not being taken seriously by a lot of people, and I think Midge kind of forgets that. So she wants to be important. And so Midge needs to realize that and understand that and needs to grow in herself. But also Midge needs to sometimes cry it out. And Susie needs to understand the emotional sides of having this relationship.
Right.
I thought it was great character development for both of them. And I was so happy that that scene happened.
I definitely mixed that up last episode when I talked about this scene. This is the scene. This is my favorite scene of the season, I think, or top 3. I love this scene so much because it's such a good way to show differencing emotions, but also to genuinely nice people who care about each other, and there's a friendship behind the managerial side.
Except for, because they have it out so much, there also is a scene where they end up kind of parting ways. I felt like this was the moment when Susie was so upset with Midge that they sort of have that F you, no F you, and then
Oh,
Midge
no, you're
goes-
right.
Yeah.
I was talking about episode 6. fight.
Which we will get to.
It's just that fight's so prevalent in our minds all the time because
Right.
it is such a great scene. Sorry.
Yes.
No, that's okay. I mean, Midge and Susie's relationship is very complicated, so we'll talk about
This
that
is the
scene
one
as
where
well.
she
Yeah.
kind of quits.
Yes, exactly.
That's what that was. Sorry about that, guys.
We'll get to it. But yeah, this was intense. I mean, like, it hurt me to see Midge and Susie not on the same page.
Yeah, but at the same time, Midge, in a way, I don't want to say has taken advantage of Susie, but she doesn't understand that this woman's doing a lot for her and is completely changing her life. She kind of is just expecting people to help her like they always have. And Susie has been going on a ledge for her since the second she met her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was intense.
Well, and it's important for Mitch to understand that she's a reflection of Susie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Definitely. So this was good. I think it was nice to see some real emotional stakes in the show, especially, I've said it before, but they feel like the central love story to me. But of course, this isn't only Midge's episode. We also get some isolated Joel stuff with his parents and Penny. They go out to dinner, and we get the real version of how Joel's parents feel about Penny.
No.
They don't really like her, do they?
No.
That's all they will say. Really. I mean, well, they go into it, but that's the initial reaction. No.
I kind of thought they were more polite to her in person than I thought they were going to be. They weren't rude necessarily, and any person could leave that situation going, oh, it went okay.
I think that's a reflection, one of the time period and maybe of, I don't know about Jewish religion, but I was raised Presbyterian as well, and that was like, that's what you did. If you didn't like someone, you were nice to them.
Yeah.
And if they left, you could talk behind their back. But you were never going to do it to their face. You were going to be nice and cordial to their face and then say what you wanted when they left.
Yeah.
Sounds right, yeah. It's funny, I actually think sometimes, obviously I hate Penny because she's the mistress, but sometimes I think the show is a little harder on her than I think she deserves. Well, and we see another side of Penny later, but I didn't think she was like that cringy at this dinner. Maybe the goy in me is like identifying with Penny a little bit.
No, she wasn't that cringy, but she's no Midge.
Right. Yeah.
And even Joel realizes that. I mean, it's obvious.
I mean, I think that's what her parents were trying to convey. They were doing it in a very rude way, but it was just, this is not the girl for you. She doesn't really have much brains, not to be rude to Penny, but we kind of have already seen that with her. She's not the quickest thinker. We'll say it that way. Where Midge is a very quick thinker, and her not eating, especially with like the mom, like that dynamic.
Yeah.
Midge is an eater. Like she might be thin and tiny and little, but we see her eat all the time. Believe me, I hate her for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. There is something about Penny Pan. I get what you're saying, Jeff, but it just pisses me off. And the audacity, though, to just kind of go to that dinner and her calmness, I wanted her to be scared. And I was just like, why aren't you scared? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
I also wonder if this is maybe the first time in Joel's kind of life where people haven't accepted a woman that he was with, because not only do the parents but also his friends, with the Music Man
Yeah.
tickets, bail out, and I think that makes him kind of reflect on what he's doing and why am I with this person, and he can't maybe find an answer for that.
It's true. It's like important for him to also analyze, like, what am I doing? Like, why did I really let go of Midge, and what kind of woman am I really looking for? Because we kind of learned throughout the show that Joel is essentially a weak man, and I think he might not have in order to date a strong woman, you need to have a self-assurance in yourself. And I think he's realizing that maybe he doesn't have the balls that he needs to actually date someone who's worth his time.
Yeah, a man wants to feel like they're the man. They're wearing the pants in their relationship. I think at the end of the day, that was his biggest issue with Midge, is that he knew deep down that she was the smarter one, that she was funnier, she was just kind of better. So when he wanted to date down.
Right, he wanted to date down.
To someone who cannot sharpen a pencil.
So this was interesting stuff. Good character development from Joel and great work from Joel's parents. I love those two performances.
There's also the episode where Joel finds out that Midge is working.
Oh, that's right.
It's like it's at the very end. Her mom just drops that line.
Yep. Yeah, it is interesting to see the female experience through the male gaze a little bit, which is what we see through Joel during this time. The last thing we see is Midge at her work party with her friends that I love. And even though she's given up on stand-up, she quit, her and Susie had this fallout, she can't let it go. She turns stand-up Midge back on at this party, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I loved it. I would love that job. Bring me to a party,
I love the dynamic that this guy is hitting on her, and she realizes it and then says it out loud to him. Oh, you're hitting on... No, this isn't what I'm here for, but thank you.
It was like she handled it in like a very sweet way.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
I should take that on.
Yeah. So this is, of course, a preview of the Midge we're going to be exploring next episode, which I'd love to discuss now. Before I do, any other thoughts on Doink? Before we move on.
Do you want to just go over that?
The Doink, yeah. Of course, there's a lot of ways you can say Doink when you're on stage. If it's a punchline, you can't just say Doink. You have to say Doink. And come on, Midge. It would have been funny if you had done it that way.
I mean, you would have been a hit.
Yeah, that would have been the thing that made those jokes work. I feel like it's a perfect word for Midge's journey as a comic in this episode. She kind of gets her doink during this episode. Yes, she
definitely does.
Well, the next episode we're talking about is episode 6, titled Mrs. X and the Gaslight, directed by Scott Ellis, who has a very impressive resume, by the way. Check him out. And written by Sheila Lawrence, one of the very few non-Palladino writing credits in this season, but she's worked with them for years. So she's sort of their third brain if they need a third brain, is Sheila Lawrence. I love that she's a woman. It's perfect for this show. Let's talk about it. How did you guys feel about episode 6 of this show?
I mean, me and Steph, I think, already touched about it with our jumping
Susie.
ahead.
Yeah.
This may have been my favorite episode of the show because of some of the dynamic we get with Susie and Mitch.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Yeah, I feel like I was really anxious during it because I'm like, I just want her to be in the downtown scene, and she has to fix her kind of like the train wreck that's happening, but she's so classy about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, an extremely important part, and it's important that they touch on it, and it sometimes was hard to watch, but again, I love watching her, and I really enjoyed it.
Definitely. So the first thing we see is, a thing I love about this show is that whenever we end the episodes, we jump right in where they picked up. Mm-hmm. Nothing drives me crazier than watching a show
that's jumped forward in time.
Yeah, or just like doesn't address what just happened.
Yeah.
This show always lets us like right back into where we were. So we see Party Midge killing it as a stand-up. This was so fun for me. And like, it's just so much fun to see Midge in her element. And again, the way it was shot and directed was just so warm. Sometimes people will discuss Amy Sherman-Palladino's writing style as just kind of like cozy and like you're having a cup of coffee with your friends. And like watching Midge just kill at these parties was lovely, I thought.
Yeah, and the cuts, the montages, the music, the way it just looks so easy for her.
Because it is.
Yeah.
To what you were saying about writing for comedians in shows, it's really crazy how they consistently, I'm laughing as if I'm there, even though it's it's part of the time period. It's still funny, and you can still see why she's just gifted at it. Everyone wants to look at her.
It's the charisma. There was one specific joke that I think was my favorite of her stand-up when she's talking about Christmas presents versus Hanukkah presents. And she's like, for Christmas, you get a bike to remind you that your parents love you. But for Hanukkah, you get a sock to remind you that you are persecuted. Pretty funny. It's like, it's good. It's hard to write that stuff. And it's really, really well performed.
And it's very real. You know, I grew up Jewish, of course, and everyone goes, well, you're so lucky. You get 8 awesome gifts. No, we don't.
Except for some.
Yeah.
Because I had a friend that wasn't, she did. But, you know, I know
as
that
long
goes
as
both
you're
ways.
reminded, though, that you still feel guilty and feel persecuted even through...
But you're still getting a gift every single night, okay?
Well, and I love that this show has both dynamics, because I think that for so long in television, we've only kind of seen the Christmas aspect of stuff, or we only get to see the Hanukkah, more so Christmas. But, so I like having both kind of in one go.
It's so nice. It's a loving portrayal of both. It's like an equal opportunity. Everyone's getting kind of made fun of in this show, but in a way that feels very warm.
Yeah.
It's nice. So one of the dynamics we see about Midge and her new sort of party persona is that she's actually sort of adopted this interesting partnership with Randall, played by Nate Cordry, and they sort of have a Nichols and May dynamic. And actually, I'm going to call an audible quickly. Our producer, Phil, I actually want that to be our stand-up segment. So if you could find a Nichols and May bit, that would be amazing. How did you guys feel about this, sort of the Midge and Randall partnership dynamic?
It was great for this time. I think that they, portrayed it well, but technically speaking, and even now, it could get a little problematic, especially if you're thinking essentially she's being kind of hired to go to parties. That she has a man with her, that's good, but I don't know. I think, especially in this day and age, if that were to happen, it could be seen a little bit differently, having a woman in some way, shape, or form being kind of hired to be there.
Right.
I didn't mind the Randall and Midge dynamic. I thought that they were funny together. I thought that they had good back and forth with each other. And I don't find anything wrong with a woman and a man stand up being a team, but I do think for her it's an important lesson that she kind of learns that she's still finding crutches and in many different ways. And with this one, it's finding another person to lean on because she can't be funny on her own.
Great point.
I like the introduction of kind of a different style of comedy, which is improv and kind of playing off each other and listening to each other. But I really just I don't think Randall's funny. I think she's funny, and he's a classic, really nice white man doing his nice 50s comedy.
Yeah, I found him funny.
Yeah, I found him funny enough. I agree that, like, for the show, this isn't about her as a partner. It's about her as a stand-up. Though I do wish the show would have let us explore this for just a little longer. I feel like we got a taste of what their partnership was, and then it got very quickly shut down. But that's okay. I mean, that's not what the show is. I'm always someone who's going to prefer Midge the comic to, like, Midge the tragic housewife. That's just how I feel about this show. And they're both important because they highlight the opposite. But I could have used a bit more of this kind of improv dynamic just because it was fun. But
would you want to have seen them actually perform on stage together at a real event before
one
it ended?
scene.
Yeah.
Maybe one scene.
I think just for her, just more failures to learn from,
Yeah.
that's a good way to know, I am a one-man show, which she is.
It would have been interesting if they had that dynamic on stage, and unlike parties where people know her and are coming up and saying stuff to her too, like at the end of it, they all just flock to him, and then it makes her realize what that dynamic would have been.
I was picturing that exactly. Or on stage, it feels much more like she's the dizzy broad. Like we see that she does just become this. But I know they have to squeeze so much plot into just these 8 episodes. So
it's hard when you have such a short
season, and it's fine. I mean, there's only so much they can do, and you always do want to be left wanting more as a viewer. So that's good. But what's interesting is this actually leads to a meeting with a potential agent. So they sit down.
Lou.
Yeah, with Lou. And Midge is just, toying with it. It's nothing super serious. But Susie finds out and she's not happy about it.
I don't think Midge understood that her meeting with this agent to Susie would have been like, you're replacing me. Mm-hmm. For her, I think she's like, no, I just talked to this guy. He's going to give me some advice. Like, maybe he'll, handle if me and Randall do stuff together. Like, she's not thinking of it in the way Susie's like, you're my only client.
Right.
And you're replacing me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Susie definitely takes action.
Yes.
And I think this was an important moment for Susie to actually get the kick in the pants that she needed.
Yeah, I love this scene, and I haven't touched on all of... Susie actually gives me probably the biggest laughs out of anyone, either what people say to her or what she has to say, but she said, we're like, the contract between you and your testicles, there's 2 of us and we're attached. And I said, yes!
So much good writing. Yeah, I'm predicting an Emmy win for Rachel Brosnahan, and I'm definitely picturing an Emmy nom for Alex Borstein.
Supporting, for sure.
She deserves it.
Yeah, she definitely does. And I think, like you said, it was just kind of a kick in the balls for her, too, because she said to Midge 1 or 2 episodes ago, I have a job, I can't just be with you all the time. But if she's actually trying to groom Midge into being the next biggest comedian ever, this is your job. You do need to kind of be with her a lot and help her through all of this. She's the talent. She's a pain in the ass, but that's what you signed up for,
Yeah, part of being a manager is like dealing with the talent, grooming them, and they're best friends, but there are moments when your job is to just support them, make them the best they can be.
Yeah.
So this was good stuff, and it's fun to see Midge growing. She continues to attend parties, and we do see that really she just has the taste for solo-driven stand-up comedy. So that's fun to see. We also have to talk about Abe's promotion, though. We get a lot of fun.
What was it?
Bell
Labs?
Bell Labs, yeah. He's been waiting for this his whole life, and he finally gets the promotion. They go out to dinner, and who's there but Joel Maisel? This scene played out differently than I expected to in a good way. How did you guys feel about the family realizing Joel was there and Joel's reaction to all of it?
Extremely relatable for the family. Everyone panics, and it really does show. And I don't think it's just Judaism. It's any kind of family that, especially if they're close to their religion, but they're a team. One person gets hurt, they all get hurt. They're all scared. And of course, Joel's response, you see him being a little bit more human. And in the first show that we covered, we watched a Lenny Bruce clip, and he talks about going to a Chinese restaurant and seeing his ex. And I was like, that's in that later. So I felt like that was cool that they took that from his stand-up.
Really cool.
I want to touch on, for me, everything you said was great, and I do love the scene with the family at the Chinese, but I also want to talk a little bit about Astrid, who's Noah, her sister-in-law, Midge's sister-in-law, who is the non-Jewish person married into a Jewish family and trying so hard to please the parents.
Yeah, this was a really interesting character, and I'm also glad because we got to meet Midge's brother too. And again, they do such a good job of even these small characters have these really rich interior lives. And yeah, we do see insecure Astrid, and we do sort of see the pressures of a 50s housewife who doesn't have the same resilience as a Mrs. Maisel.
Well, and the main reason I want to bring her up is also for the time period thing, because she sits there saying, I'm barren, I'm old, and she's like, you're not old. She's like, I'm going to be 30.
And meanwhile, all of us on the panel are like,
what?
oh God. I know, it's really good. But we see this conversation between Midge and her brother. It's Noah, is that correct?
Noah, yeah.
With Noah and Midge on the fire escape outside.
Smoking a cigarette like some
smoking
teenagers.
a cigarette like teens. And I really, really liked this scene. It was just, I love siblings on shows. I don't think we get enough siblings dynamics, and I'm close to my siblings. And it was fun to just watch them hash it out like only family members could.
Yeah. And just kind of, especially when you have a brother that's close in age and you grow up with brothers, as a girl, it makes you tougher. And I think we maybe got a little sense into one of the reasons why Midge is the way that she is. She had this great brother figure, and they fought. They probably punched each other in the face when they were little, and she's resilient. And I mean, I related to that, on a personal level too.
I just love that she's sitting there with him, and he's like complaining about his wife, and she does this, she says that, I can't get her to... And she's like, don't leave her.
Yeah.
You signed up for like the good and the bad. She's so nervous right now that you're going to please just don't leave her. And he's like, I never will.
Yeah.
And piggybacking off what you said, just how you could see his development on Midge's life just as a brother. This episode in general, I think, did a really good job of showing how each person in her life has played into kind of molding who she is. And even her dad in the Bell Labs interview, when he's playing like he doesn't care, but he really, really cares and wants a job. Like, you have that performance aspect that carries over with Midge.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like this existed to show us what a strong man is versus a weak man. If a strong man stands by his partner because this choice was made. So good stuff, and I think it shows that the Maisels were brought up really well. Going back to the restaurant real quick, the thing I was surprised about was how Joel was kind of genuinely apologetic about the I think he could have said, like, why are you running away? But instead he was like, I'm so sorry.
Like, I've tried to avoid the places that we go.
But the ring.
Yeah, the ring that he knows that she's not wearing her ring.
No, the fact that he thinks he even has a say in that.
Yeah.
So I was like, you've overspoken. Get out, Joel. Now.
I didn't take it as that. I took it as like it was just him realizing that she's moving on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was his dinner did not seem fun. It seemed like a bore, and he looks over at the Maisels, and they're...
Well, her mom even comments on it. He, checked his watch or something?
Yeah, and he probably wishes he was at that table, and he's missing out on that other family that he had, and thinking, God, I'm such a moron.
Yeah, I think the last episode and this episode are really the episodes for Joel to realize exactly what he's losing.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the range of reactions we have to Joel shows what a complicated character he is, because like, it's easy to hate on Joel, but there's also this, and I think part of that owes to Michael Zegan's performance.
Yeah, he's
it might
great.
be Zegan. I couldn't find. I've heard different pronunciations for his last name, but let us know in the comments. Is Zegan or Zegan? Tell us. But yeah, he's really, really good, and I think he does a great job of making an unsympathetic character still likable.
Yeah.
Especially as we move along in the story.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is mostly episode 6. If there's any other hot takes that I missed, I'd love to hear about it now.
I just want to touch on, we don't have to go into it a whole lot, but the psychic with the mom dynamic.
Yeah, how have we not talked about that yet? There's so much in this show. Just so good.
Yeah.
It just is so telling that her mother goes there for advice. Like,
Yeah.
I need to know what's going to happen in the future. Like, her mom is so concerned all the time and so nervous and anxious all the time.
Definitely.
That she needs a psychic to tell her everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, it really made me. I have a stand-up set. I think it's probably on my website you can find. But when my parents got divorced, my mom went to a psychic. That's like, what's gonna happen? And I was 10, and I got my first psychic reading. And I don't know if it's a Jewish thing. I'm not really sure what it is, but it was completely relatable and very, very funny. And just that Midge is very aware that this is what her mother does, and it's just a typical kind of passing thing. I just thought it was so great.
And just shout out to that actress that played, it was like just her little like,
Yeah.
you want me to kill Joel kind of things with the mom not understanding. That was great.
Hilarious. Well, these are dense episodes, guys, so if we're missing anything, let us know in the comments. We will hop in there. We will continue the conversation. Before we wrap the show, though, we have our special segment, which I'm excited about. Today, we're doing our stand-up spotlight, and we're going to watch some Nichols and May because it was referenced in the show. So just so you guys know, Nichols and May were a very, very famous male-female stand-up partnership. Their work kind of teetered more into sort of improv and sketch than stand-up directly, but very important in the world of comedy. So let's check it out. Yeah, so that really gives you sort of a flavor of their stand-up. And what I like about this sketch is she started taking the reins.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I just love how slow they're going because it's like anticipation of when are we gonna, where is it gonna hit?
You said that's complete improv, right? Because you can kind of see her the yes-anding.
Yes.
It's just cool to watch them think about it, but also do it in a talented way.
Yeah, it's kind of the birth, I think, of improvisational comedy as
Yeah.
well. So they're fun to watch, and I think Nichols and May, you can find any of their stuff, and it's great. So definitely check them out, and it'll give you a really important look into the time period. Well, as I mentioned last show, we're not going to get into predictions, guys, because for our final 2 episodes, we in fact know what happens. But if you haven't seen them, hop in the comments now and let us know your thoughts. Until then, guys, this has been the after show for Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Today we covered episodes 5 and 6, which means we only have 2 more, guys. 1 more after show coming up right after this. But until then, my name's Jeff, everyone. If you want to find me online, you can do that on Twitter at Jeffrey C. Graham.
And I'm Sam Davidson. I'm not going to be here for the last 2 episodes, sadly. I love this show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram at SamD43, online at SamDavidsonEntertainment.com. Always down to talk about it. Tweet me. Love it. Talk to you guys soon.
And you guys can find me at Bri, that's BRI_Phipps, PHIPPS on Twitter and Instagram.
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Steph Sabraw. Yeah, come talk to me. I get bored.
We'll see you in 5 minutes, guys. Bye.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Keven Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
See you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.